Hey, folks, welcome back to A Week for Life here in the Diocese of Cleveland. I'm Mike Hayes. I'm the Director of Young Adult Ministry. Joining me is Father Neil Kookoothe, and he is the pastor at St Clarence Church out in North Olmstead here in the diocese. And he's an expert on the death penalty, which is our topic for today. Father Neil, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here. Always willing to talk about the death penalty. It certainly has been a significant part of my ministry for the last 26 years. And so I'm always glad to talk about it.
Yeah, let's start out and talk about your experience with this. I know you've accompanied a number of people who've been on death row. Could you tell me a little bit about your experience with them?
So I started my work with the death penalty back in 1996 in my very first assignment at St. Francis de Sales in Parma. And I never expected to get involved with prison ministry or death row ministry at all, but a discalced Carmelite brother from Austin, Texas, had an article in the National Catholic Reporter asking people to write to a death row inmate. And I thought, what the heck? It can't hurt. So I wrote back to him, and he gave me the name of a man here on death row. He's still actually the longest living guy that I've been working with. Everybody else has pretty much been executed.
Oh, wow.
Keith Pennis is his name. And I started writing to Keith in 1996. Visiting with Keith in 1996 as well. And then Keith would introduce me to the men in his adjacent cell or the cell block. And I would then get to know them through Keith. And then I sent them all Christmas cards one particular year. And I ended up with 34 death row inmate pen pals. You can't do that. That's too hard to sustain.
Yeah.
And so it ended up really with a group of about 10 men that I was working with on a routine basis. I'm still working with a few of them. I have walked through the whole execution process with 4 of them.
Oh, wow.
And it's been just a real life-giving experience to my ministry. And I really think not just to my ministry, but to the people of my parishes who have come to know more about the death penalty and the guys on the row because of my experiences.
Yeah, what have you learned in accompanying these guys that maybe you didn't know before?
Well, one thing, when I signed up to work for this, I was not there to be a death penalty or a death row voyeur. I wasn't there to be salacious about what kind of crime they committed or anything.
Right.
All I really wanted to do was let them know that they had somebody who cared on the outside.
Right.
And so I never really asked them any questions about their crimes or what they did or what they didn't do. I was just there as a contact and somebody on the outside. And I learned that you really have to companion them for a period of time, maybe 3 to 6 months, so that they know they can trust you.
Yeah, sure.
That you're not somebody who's going to write them once or twice and then write them off. And so when they saw that I was involved not only with them, but with other men on the row, and that I was here for the long haul, they began to trust me. And then they would then say, you can ask me anything you want. But then they also got to the point where they opened up to me. And then they would say to me, do you think, this is a quote from one of the guys, do you think that God could love someone like me? Someone that did what I did. Is there any room in God's heart for me? Which I, at the time, thought was really one of the saddest conversations I had with a death row inmate. And I realized that, they had been forgotten and abandoned by so many people that it's easy for them to think that they have been forgotten and abandoned by God. And their vision and their understanding of God is really quite small. And so I really began to look at my experience of being to expand their vision of God so that they know that there is the possibility of forgiveness and redemption and for God to welcome even them in spite of the horrendous things they may have done. It was a really big learning experience for me about how we need, just not just for death row guys, but for all of us to have an expansive vision of who God is and what God is all about in our lives.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, how many people have small things that in terms of comparison, people have small things in their life that make them feel like God doesn't love them. Now take
Absolutely.
that to the 10th power with some of these guys, right?
Absolutely. We really need to understand. The disciples ask the question when Christ gets into the boat with them after stilling the storm, who is this man that even the wind and the seas obey him? And I think that's kind of the question that I push the guys on death row to answer for themselves.
Yeah.
Who is this man? And then you get into the whole idea of spiritual direction with the men and opening up the new doors and new places for them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Father Greg Boyle out in the West Coast is, a hero of mine. He always talks about standing in awe of what people have had to carry in their life. When he meets people who, he works a lot with gang rehabilitation, and he said when he looks at some of these gang members, he sees what they've had to carry in their life, and he kind of stands in awe that they've been able to carry that. Has that been your experience with some of these guys?
It really has been. It's because, my experience of the men on death row is that their lives have been utter chaos. Many of them, at a very young age, begin to experience sexual and physical abuse and mental abuse at the hands of those who should be caring for them the most. And so they don't just go out there on a day and decide that they're going to commit murder. These things begin at the very earliest part of their development and what they are exposed to, and then they come to a life that literally leads them to this. And I've never experienced the men as they're painted online on the Ohio Attorney General's website or the death penalty website. I don't know those men. I know men who have sought forgiveness, who are remorseful for their crimes. I know guys who have treated me with nothing but respect. It's a total 180 from the presentation that the courts and the Attorney General's office paint to the men that I know. And once you know the story behind the men, it doesn't excuse a crime by any means.
Sure.
The crimes that are committed are horrendous and inexcusable. But when you put a story behind the face and a story behind the name, the man becomes humanized. And when the man becomes humanized, it becomes a little bit more difficult to execute somebody that you know and that you know their story to.
Sure.
It's very easy for us to execute something that we don't know anything about.
Yeah.
But when you know the story and the background, it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Sure. Well, I'll play that card if you would. So let's say I'm listening to this and I'm somebody who says, yeah, but I'm not going to lose any sleep about putting these guys to death.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what number one, what the church teaches about this, but number two, what are some persuasive arguments that you might use, or maybe that you have used, to convince people of the church's position on this?
Yeah. Well, when I would go out, and I still go out, but not as often as I did, and we would speak to different groups, myself and Joe D'Ambrosio, who's been released from death row and works for me here at the parish. One of the things, people would get very angry at us as we're talking about it, especially if they were supporters of the death penalty. And we tell them, we're not here to tell you that you can't believe in the death penalty or support the death penalty. We're here to tell you a story of an innocent man that spent 22 years on death row, and now he's free. You have to deal with the reality of the story. It's true. So you have to deal with that. And we would get people who would put their arms up in the air and scream, well, this is a prudential judgment. The church teaches we can execute people because it's just a prudential judgment, and it's been part of our history in the past. Well, thanks be to God for Francis.
Yeah, right.
Because he took the prudential judgment argument right off the table for anybody that might want to make it, and has literally said that, we can no longer as a church in any way say that we respect life and at the same time support the death penalty. So he's literally said to us in no way or no uncertain terms that the death penalty is no longer acceptable in Catholic teaching. Yeah. And so the prudential argument is right off the bat. Right. But, a lot of people want to, they get into the arguments that, this is a deterrent for crime.
Ha, sorry.
Studies have shown that this is not a deterrent. It never has been a deterrent. And most law enforcement officials will tell you that it hasn't been a deterrent. But if you do some studies, people want to make economic arguments, it fails. Racial arguments, it fails. A geographic argument, it fails. There's one argument that I can't defend the death penalty about. And that is if they want to say, we want to get our ounce of blood here. We want vengeance. And if that's the argument that they're going to make, I do not have a counter argument for it. How can you have a counter argument for vengeance? But vengeance is not what the United States justice system has ever been about.
No.
It's always been about literally restoration and rehabilitation and the possibility for redemption, even for those on death row.
Right.
And that's what our faith is too, that there's always a part of us that has the opportunity for redemption and reconciliation. That's the one argument that somebody can put in my face that I can't counter. But we're not people of vengeance, or we're not supposed to be people of vengeance.
Right. Yeah. No, I really like the the idea when people often say, well, this is a deterrent. And I'm like, as if these guys' lives every day that they didn't wake up with the possibility of death looming in their face.
Yeah, and most of these guys commit these crimes. They're either high, or they're drunk, or they're in a fit of rage. Yeah. And if they were not under the influence of something, these crimes would never occur.
Right.
And so they're not looking at the time that these things are happening to say, well, if I commit this crime, what's going to happen to me? I'll end up being on death row. They're not in a state of mind where they are competent to make any decision at the time. Right. And so they're, the deterrent aspect just fails.
Yeah, again and again. Yeah. Well, let's think about our area of Northeast Ohio. What are things that are maybe on the docket now that we should be concerned about in terms of the death penalty?
Well, I think people really need to educate themselves about the death penalty and to literally kind of get themselves into it. We have in Ohio really kind of two organizations that literally are anti-death penalty organizations: the Ohioans to Stop Execution and Death Penalty Abolitionists. They're both run out of Columbus, Ohio. And they literally have tons and tons of resources on their websites for people to keep in contact with their legislators and with the developments in the law that are coming up. A quick note to a legislator who is literally looking to possibly abolish the death penalty. The Columbus Dispatch in the last month has done an editorial for the very first time calling for an end to the death penalty in the state of Ohio. That's a major movement in Ohio for that to happen. We need to get Cleveland and Cincinnati and some of our other major newspapers in larger cities to jump on that and to literally get on that bandwagon so that we might be able to eliminate this here in Ohio. We haven't had an execution in Ohio for the last 2 years. The last guy was Bob Van Hook, who I was with when he was executed. But there's really no reason for us. We can, if the death penalty is meant, people will say, well, we need to keep our homes and our streets and our neighborhoods safe. Well, then, sure, I agree with that. Then let's talk about getting these guys off death row, which is much more expensive in the long run than keeping them in prison for life without parole. Let's protect the dignity of life, and let's put them in with life without parole, but we don't need to kill them in order to keep our neighborhoods safe.
And we have a new administration now, and the federal death penalty has been in the headlines lately with President Trump executing a fair number of folks in the last couple of months of his office. What have you heard now about the federal death penalty in the new, new administration?
I think Trump's administration executed 13 guys.
That's right.
I think that's about what it is, 13 guys. And it just is interesting that came all in the last 4 to 5 months of his administration. I think that was a political ploy. Let's go and show that we're the law and order administration again. Let's do that by executing a few people that have been on the federal death row for years and years and years, which we have not exercised in the federal government in years and years and years. And let's make an example out of these 13 men and women. So I really was quite concerned and very upset by the fact that we started killing people at the federal level in the last few months of this administration. I haven't heard this directly from anybody, who's in a position of authority in the Biden administration.
Sure.
But the word is out there that he is going to put back a moratorium on federal executions so that no more will be going forward in the immediate future. I don't know what he will do as far as, will he attempt to abolish it at the federal level, to get rid of at the federal level? I think that remains to be seen, but I don't think we're looking at more executions right now at the federal level.
Sure. So, write your president. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you about these kinds of things.
Sure. And your legislators.
Yeah, right.
Let them know. I really do believe that the federal death penalty will come up in his administration.
Oh, sure.
It's not going to be just swept under the table as something that we don't talk about. Somewhere along the line, it's going to come up. And we need to be ready to contact people and to express our opinions about this when it does come up, whether it's a phone call to somebody's office or whether it's a letter. And that's the nice thing about these organizations, even in Ohio. They have template letters that you can use and send to your legislators. And they make it so easy for you to be in contact with these people and express your opinions about it.
Sure. Father Neil, it's been great having you. Thank you for your ministry for all these many years in accompanying people on death row. And I keep it up is all I could really say.
More than happy to do it. It's been a life-giving experience.
Great. This is A Week for Life. We've been talking about the death penalty with Father Neil Kookoothe, and we will be seeing you the rest of the week on many other issues. So stay tuned. Thanks.